This is Orange Nation Overtime with Steve Infanti and Paulie Sibilia.
Welcome into Orange Nation Overtime, everyone. Alongside Paulie Sibilia, I'm Steve Infanti. We've made it to Friday. A lot going on. Women's basketball tonight. Big men's lacrosse game tomorrow. Syracuse at Johns Hopkins. And, of course, the final home game of the regular season for SU men's basketball against Pittsburgh. Let's start with the women briefly. Dominique Darius, we saw her get injured in the second half of the game yesterday. We were all wondering whether or not she will play. She will not play. She's out for the entirety of the ACC tournament. We don't know anything beyond that, Paulie, but that is a big loss for Felicia Leggett-Jack in the Orange. Yeah,
not what you need going into the tournament if you want to make upsets is to have one of your best players hurt, your point guard, your leader. You got to hope she's ready to go. You luckily, women's basketball is a week behind in everything, so you got an extra week to maybe heal it up going into the NCAA tournament. So
all we know, it's a hand injury. We don't know anything beyond that, how long she's out for, but she will not play in the ACC tournament. Liv Schmidt will play. Olivia Schmidt left early with what looked like an ankle injury yesterday as well, but she will play against Louisville, so just down one player, not two. We did see when Darius was out, Syracuse really struggled to take care of the basketball. 21 turnovers against Cal. Did have enough, though, to hang on to get that win. They'll take on Louisville tonight at 7 in the ACC quarterfinals. A loss and most likely an 8-9 seed in the NCAA tournament. We'll hear from Tim Leonard a little bit later on about that. Men's basketball, senior day in the Dome, last game for JJ, and quite possibly last game in the Dome for Adrian Autry as this team wraps up the regular season anyway tomorrow.
It could be the last game for this entire roster,
right?
Really. So, if you want to see them one last time, go out and enjoy it. Have fun.
And again, men's lacrosse. It used to be the biggest rivalry in the sport. Syracuse, Johns Hopkins. We had Drew Carter on our Orange Nation radio show this afternoon. Drew will be calling the game tomorrow, and we started him off by asking him about the rivalry, and I asked him if it moves the needle for him anymore. What Syracuse Hopkins used to be, is it still a heated rivalry in college lacrosse, in his opinion?
Me personally, yeah, it moves the needle. That might be my personal bias speaking. Obviously, I went to Syracuse. My sister, my only sibling, went to Hopkins, so it's a big deal in my family. Quinn Kesnick is one of my good friends, so it's a big deal for us. And I'll even tell you, originally we were planning to call this game from home. That was what was on the schedule. But I did something I've never done in almost 5 years at ESPN. I called my boss and I actually made a request, and the request was, let's be on site for this game. And it was no big deal. He said, maybe with your Celtics schedule, you couldn't make it down there, but if you want to be on site, you can. So we're going to actually be there because I think it's a really important game. Even though Syracuse and Hopkins are, quote unquote, in dry spells, at least for their standards, Johns Hopkins claims, I think, 96 national championships dating back to the pre-NCAA era. And, of course, Syracuse has the most NCAA titles with 11, not 10, 11. If you were there, you knew that they won the championship that was vacated. Yeah, they haven't won titles, each of them, in a decade and a half, and that qualifies as a dry spell for them. With that being said, they're still the two most illustrious, historic programs in the sport, and they're both pretty good this year. They've both been really up and down. For the Orange, they start 3-0, then have two pretty bad the Harvard loss wasn't necessarily bad. Harvard's good. They're getting first place votes now, but still a game you expect to win. And then against Princeton, you don't look very good at all. Then you're kind of staring a 3-game losing streak in the face when you're at Penn. It almost seems like the season is hanging in the balance, as crazy as that is to say, on the first day of March when they played that game. And then all of a sudden you rip off 5 in a row, including an overtime winner, and it kind of changes how you look at the season. Hopkins is exactly the same way. Hopkins was down 11-4 at Virginia in another rivalry game. They play even more rivalries than Syracuse does. Every week, it feels like, is a rivalry game for Hopkins. They're down 7 in the third quarter, and they come all the way back and win. It matches their largest comeback in program history, which was also against Virginia in 2018. So it's two teams that, to me, are surging. They're trending in the right direction, and they're coming off of games that could really catalyze them for the last couple months of the year. So it's a long way of answering your question, Steve. I think it does still matter, and it does still move the needle. At least it does for me.
Yeah, and you talked about the fact it's been a while since both have contended for or won a national title. Syracuse made it to the Final Four last year. We all know what the goal is this year. It's to win the national title and send Joey Spallina and that senior class out in style. They beat Maryland, but then Maryland stumbles after that. You laid out that Syracuse has struggled a little bit since that big win. Do you look at Syracuse still as a true national title contender, or do you think they've got some work to do? And I realize that it's a small sample size, but where do you kind of put them in that national title contender conversation?
I still have them in the inner circle. It wasn't that long ago that they beat Maryland, who was the number one team in the country. Now, in hindsight, maybe Maryland wasn't as good as their number one ranking, but at the time, we all thought that was fair. And like I said, Syracuse in that game at Penn, they could have pretty easily rolled over. But I think there's way too much character on this team, way too much talent, all led by the guy wearing number 22, who, the Princeton coach, Matt Madelon, still called the best player in the country after they blanked him in that game where Syracuse lost to Princeton. Joey Spallina didn't have a single point, and Matt Madelon said he's the best player in the country. And, of course, he commands a lot of attention. You know what you have in Spallina. I think as the season goes on, you'll see guys learning how to play with him even more. And there's still a lot of experience. Finn Thompson is a senior. Luke Rowe is a senior. Michael Leo scored the overtime game winner at Penn. He's been a serious contributor for a while. I think the close defense is really good. I think the goalie's really good. And I think John Mullen, the faceoff guy, is really good. It's been a bad spell for him here, but I would put my money on him figuring it out. And when you have an elite faceoff specialist, an elite goalie, and an elite attackman, and a really good close defense unit, I feel like you have enough to get back to championship weekend. And if you can get there, you can win it all.
You bring up the Princeton game, and we all saw that, they made it a point to not let Joey Spallina beat him, right? The 2 guys, 3 guys. I mean, he had all sorts of attention that game. Are you concerned, and you said naturally other guys will step up as the season progresses. Are you concerned right now that they don't have, the analogy everybody uses is the Robin to Joey Spallina's Batman? Are you concerned about that?
I mean, a little bit. He does get asked to do a whole lot, but I think he's built for it. And, we're talking about a guy who's probably going to break the program record for points this season. Like that's saying a lot. I think he can handle it, and he's a good passer. And does he try to do too much sometimes? Maybe. At least the turnovers or bad shots. But, it's early in the season. I know the guy's been, highly touted and has played a lot since his freshman year. So maybe you think like he's not going to have any rust entering the season, but maybe there was a little bit of that. And maybe there was a little bit of a growing period for those guys to play alongside him. One thing that, we talked with Gary Gate yesterday. The thing that really stood out to me is he said we've kind of gotten away from playing a little Syracuse lacrosse here the last few weeks. And what he meant by that is they haven't really been scoring in transition. When you're not winning a lot of faceoffs, it's difficult to score in transition. And I think Syracuse knows that in order to be really successful and hit the heights that they want to hit, they can't just be playing 6-on-6 all the time. That's really difficult, especially on Spallina when he's going to get so much attention in the half court, so to say. So I think they're going to try to get out in transition a little bit more this week against Hopkins, and maybe that could kind of, click things into place. And there's nobody better to get them back to playing Syracuse lacrosse than the best player in the history of the sport, who happens to be the head coach. And the interesting thing is, I'm calling this game with Q. Gary's first game at Syracuse was against Hopkins. Quint was also a freshman. He wasn't playing in that game. He ended up starting about halfway through the year. But Quinn has told me some stories from that game. His roommate was trying to defend Gary Gate and got dusted on Gary's first collegiate goal. And he came back to the sideline and said, I checked that guy as hard as I've ever hit anybody. And they were playing he had a wooden stick at the time and shattered the wooden stick and said, I checked that guy as hard as anybody I've ever hit in my life. And he wasn't bothered at all. So it's a good reminder of what a freak Gary was as a player. And, obviously he's the right guy to get them back to playing Syracuse lacrosse.
That's a great story. What do we need to know about Hopkins from a personnel standpoint heading into this game tomorrow?
They're really young. They only have a couple of seniors who play a lot for them. Their best player is Matt Collison, who is one of those seniors. He's probably going to be a first-round pick in the PLL draft. I think he and Spallina will both go in the first round of the PLL. So he's a senior, big midfielder, 6'4", 225. He's a Canadian guy. He's been an All-American every year he's played at Hopkins. He's the most dangerous guy, plays off ball, And then their attackman, they've got this kid, Jimmy Ayers, who's from Massachusetts, super shifty guy, not the biggest dude, but extremely quick. Think about, small jitterbug type lacrosse players throughout the years. Think of like a Joey Sankey from back in the day. I think Jimmy Ayers is a little bit like that. And then, between the pipes and at the X, they have some question marks. They pulled their goalie Dash Lamity, who's this highly touted freshman, in the first quarter against Virginia when they got down big. He gave up 4 goals, didn't have a save, so they go to Orange Elias, which is a great lacrosse name. And he's probably, if I had to guess, going to start tomorrow. And then at faceoff, they did not do very well against Virginia until they put in this guy Carter Kryzak, who's a guy from North Carolina, and he really helped them turn that game around. And Carter Kryzak is a great story. It's kind of nuts and tragic in a way. His family house that he grew up in burned down last week. And then on the weekend, he comes out and really swings the game when he comes in the second half. Everybody's okay. There were no injuries. His parents managed to get everybody out, including their 2 dogs. So Polly will be happy about that. But it's kind of been a tumultuous week, to say the least, for this kid, Carter Kryzak, and he played really well, and they kind of rallied around him last weekend. So at the specialists, it's kind of a question mark, but those guys both played really well against UVA.
Last question on the game before we move on to some Celtics talk. I know you're doing the game, so I don't know how comfortable you feel sharing a prediction, but who do you think wins? If you don't want to share a prediction, what do you think the game comes down to?
Well, I'm not going to pull a Kirk Herbstreit and refuse to make a pick when I'm announcing a game later that day. But I will say I really have no idea. I do see it as kind of a toss-up. I think there are a lot of similarities in terms of how these teams are playing, and maybe they could be catalyzed by the comeback from last week. But with what I just said in mind, in terms of Hopkins not really having the one guy at the faceoff X. I mean, they have 6 faceoff guys on the roster, and they'll probably play at least 4 of them if I had to guess. I kind of think this could be an opportunity for John Mullen to get right. And so I see Syracuse maybe winning the possession game, and that could lead to some transition opportunities. And I think that they could, unlock the offense a little bit. So I think that's what it'll come down to. If Syracuse can find a little rhythm playing outside of the 6-on-6, they should be in a good spot.
All right, let's move on to the NBA. As you said, you've got a game to call tonight. Before you get to that lacrosse game tomorrow, Celtics, Mavs, there's some added interest for a few reasons, namely Jason Tatum. What are you hearing? Do you think we're going to see him back on the court tonight?
I do. I mean, I'd be really surprised if, they upgrade him to questionable yesterday and then he doesn't suit up. I mean, it's not like it's completely out of the realm. I think, maybe they want him to go through warm-ups and feel what it's like to be playing in a regular season game again, and then they'll make a decision after that. But I'd be pretty surprised if we don't see him tonight. The question I want to know is, A, will he start? B, by the way, he's played 585 regular season games in his career, and he started every single one of them. So will he have to adapt to coming off the bench? I don't know. B, how many minutes is he going to play? I think if I had to guess, it'd be around 20 to 25. And then C, how does he fit into this team, which has sort of developed a new identity in his absence? I mean, Jaylen Brown is, he's top 5 on the MVP ladder on NBA.com. He's averaging almost 30 points a game. And I think, to be honest with you, JB has relished the opportunity to prove himself as a bona fide number 1 option. Even despite the fact that he's already won finals MVP and conference finals MVP, I think JB is aware of the narrative that he's always been, like you said earlier, Steve, the Robin to JT's Batman. That's the easiest comparison to make. And I think a lot like Scottie Pippen when MJ went to play baseball, Jaylen has proven that he himself is an MVP candidate who can lead a team to a really successful regular season. I mean, I bring up Jordan and Pippen because it's kind of the only precedent we have for this, with a perennial All-NBA player joining a really good team near the top of the standings in March. And MJ didn't shoot the ball well in his first game back, and then in his 5th game had 55 at MSG. And they ended up losing in the playoffs against the Magic with Shaq and Penny. So I really have no idea what it's going to look like. On paper, Steve, if you're not overthinking it, they're second in the East, and they're adding a top 5 player to that roster. They should be the favorites. But if you look a little bit deeper into it, it is really tough to say how this is going to go. Like, What happens if he gets a minor injury and has to sit out a few games or a week? Like, is that going to delay his readiness for a playoff series? I just don't know. I mean, we're in an unprecedented situation. What I do know is when he checks into the game, whether it's as a starter or reserve tonight, that place is going to be popping. And, oh, by the way, Cooper Flagg is playing against the Celtics for the first time.
That's our good friend Drew Carter. Love having him on the show. Always great insight. He talked about the Celtics there. And that makes a lot of sense, Paulie, that, on paper, he says, you're adding a top 5 player in the NBA back to this lineup. They should be the favorites in the East, but they've also gotten used to playing without him. It will be interesting to see how they kind of get reacclimated to having their best player back.
And you've seen that happen before, too, where you inject your best player, and maybe even done it here at Syracuse, and it doesn't work out quite like you expected it to. It might slow things down for a little bit. I still think they're with him. They might be the favorite for the East.
Yeah, certainly in the East, you would think. You would prefer to have your best player than not have your best player, but they may go through some growing pains getting him back. We also had Tim Leonard on the show today. I alluded to that a little bit earlier, and the injury news, and we led off with the injury news. We asked him for the latest on Dominique Darius and Olivia Schmidt. Here's what Tim Leonard had to say.
I'll start with the good news, guys. Liv Schmidt is healthy for the game, and I expect her to start at point guard in place of Dominique Darius. Dominique Darius is out for the entirety of the ACC tournament, and it is a left-hand injury. I'm sure plenty saw the play. It was a very scary play, collision right by the midcourt line on a pass coming from underneath the basket from Sophie Burrows, trying to outlet it. And Dom was in a whole lot of pain, went into the locker room, came back out, and it seems like she is out definitely for the rest of the ACC tournament. I guess the good news is the way the women's calendar is set up, you get a break next week, and then it's the NCAA tournament. They have all the other conference tournaments kind of next week outside of Power Conference on the women's side. So Selection Sunday's not till March 15th. Your first game is at the earliest, probably March 19th, that Thursday. So they'll have some time, and hopefully Dominique Darius is back for that. We don't have any indication on when she'll be back, but she is out for the entirety of the ACC tournament. And it's going to be tough to beat Louisville. It would have been tough to beat her with Dominique Darius. I mean, Darius scored 16 points in the second quarter alone against Louisville in the first game and was their leading scorer. And when they got back into the game against Louisville, she was the player that was hitting a lot of the shots to get them back into the game. So it will be fascinating to see how Syracuse kind of fills the void without her. And I would expect to see some more of Maddie Potts probably. They're going to look to get as much size out there as possible at the guard position, knowing that Louisville is one of the tallest teams in the conference. Every player that Louisville plays is 5'10" or taller, and they start basically 4 big. So it's kind of the opposite of what the Orange saw in Cal. They saw a 4-guard lineup last night, and now they're going to see this really tall, really lengthy Louisville team, and we'll see what they do to try and counteract it. I know Coach Jack is always very proud of how deep her bench is and always talks about next player up, so that's going to be the case for the rest of the ACC tournament when it comes to Dominique Darius.
Tim, you just mentioned a moment ago that, what Darius can do from a scoring perspective, but her game is about much more than that, right? And it's about running the team. And we saw when she left yesterday, I don't think it's a coincidence that Cal was able to come back, and turnovers were an issue for Syracuse. They had 21 of them in the game. How much of the other things are they going to miss? I mean, obviously they'll miss her scoring, but just her leadership, her, ability to, run the offense. What are some of those other things that they're going to miss with her being out?
Yeah, she really is like an extra coach out there. And I guess the good news is when you use that expression, she can be a coach on the sideline today in a way. And she definitely was using her leadership on the sideline towards the end of the game, even though she wasn't available to finish the game last night. The one thing I think we really need to focus on or watch for in this particular game tonight, Louisville is known for blitzing ball screens. And what that means is they're going to send an extra defender, basically double team trap you when there is a high ball screen set by Syracuse. They'll add that big and the guard and just immediately blitz off of the screen. And Liv Schmidt, who is going to start at point guard, we expect, is a 5'5" point guard. And I mentioned earlier, Louisville's very long already, 5'10" or taller, are all their rotational players. So how Syracuse handles that, the blitzing of the ball screens, which is something that they really struggled with in the first quarter, even when they had Dominique Darius, when these two teams met in the regular season. And for those that don't remember the game in the regular season, was the game where Syracuse didn't hit a field goal in the first quarter. Then they went on this great run in the second quarter, played really well in the third quarter. They cut what was a 20-point deficit or more down to a 5-point deficit in the second half and just sort of ran out of gas in the fourth quarter. So we're expecting Syracuse to play better in the first quarter, but it's really going to come down to, can they handle the pressure? I'm sure Louisville will press them as well. It feels like that is a good strategy against this team, and especially when you consider the injury to Dominique Darius. So I do think it's a huge loss, but I will say she's such a good leader that even just being around the team down here, she knows she's out for this game. She's out for the rest of the ACC tournament. She's speaking up when they're going over their film study and walkthrough and stuff and making sure that she can impact the team in as many ways as possible. So she's one of many great leaders on this team, and that's a big part of why they have had a successful season. They do have great player leadership.
Yeah, they lose Dominique Darius yesterday. The lead goes from 21 down to 4, but they got the job done down the stretch in large part because they had the best player on the court in Uche Ezoje, and she is just so impressive. And I know she's only a freshman, and we've talked about this on the show before, Tim, right, that there was a transition for her, and now she is comfortable and she dominates. And, you know, and I know players don't generally stay in the same place anymore for 4 years, but hypothetically speaking, let's say that she, decided to stay here for, multiple years. Do you think she has the ability, the potential to be the best player in program history, or is it too early for that conversation?
Oh, I mean, I guess you'd have to say yes, just because we don't really know how good she could be. I mean, she's kind of just scratching the surface. Coach Jack says that all the time. She's talked about a lot that the big thing in the offseason for Uche will be adding the three-point shot to her game. And she's only attempted 1 3 all year, but she's got a good-looking shot out to about 18, 19 feet right now. And she's working on her free throw shooting, but she does score a lot of her points in that mid-range area, a lot of turnarounds, a lot of elbow jumpers. So I would have to imagine she could add that to her game, a three-point shot. And that's the thing with her. I mean, it's like she is 21 years old already. So on one hand, she's not your typical freshman, but she hasn't been playing at this level for that long. So there's still a lot of unknown in terms of what she could add to her game. And there's a lot of room for her to get even better. So, I mean, I guess you'd have to say there's a chance, Steve, that she could be in that conversation. And obviously the biggest priority in the offseason for them is gathering as much resource money, NIL, rev share, whatever, to keep Uche Ezoje, because I'm sure South Carolina and any other school in the SEC are looking at her and thinking she'd be a great addition to our roster. So I feel confident that she has a great relationship with Coach Jack, and she really is a remarkable story, honestly. The Daily Orange did a good job with a feature article that I encourage people to read on her this week, and I mean, she's been away from her parents for 8 years, ever since she moved to Japan and started playing professionally. And to think, she FaceTimes them and she interacts with them and they watch the games or listen or however they can. But she has not been with her parents for 8 years. And she's going at this by herself. And it's led her to Syracuse, New York. And I think she is a future pro player in the WNBA. And we should note, I mean, she is draft eligible right now. If she wants to enter the draft after this year, she could go that route. But I would imagine she'd stay in college basketball because you can make a whole lot of money now in college if you're a caliber of talent like Uche Ezoje.
Tim, last basketball question before we talk some lacrosse. Let's assume that Syracuse loses tonight. We know Louisville is, favored for a reason, and there's no Dominique Darius. Let's assume SU loses. Where does that put them in the NCAA tournament field? Are they stuck on that 8-9 line?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, ESPN did bump them up to an 8 seed, projected 8 seed right now. It would be great to get off the 8-9 line just because we all know that could mean the inevitable trip to play UConn and Sarah Strong and AZ Fudd, and that'd be actually a good thing for anyone to look up right now. Go look up Sarah Strong's efficiency, her entire stats on the season. It's one of the more remarkable seasons I've seen from any college basketball player. She almost started the 60, 50, 90 club actually this year based on her field goal percentages. So that's just a ticket to lose, unfortunately, this season in stores, if we're being honest about it. Now, you still got to go there and play the first game, and it would be very encouraging to see Syracuse add another NCAA tournament win to the program here, and that would be considered a very successful season when you consider where they were in terms of the preseason metrics and how people had them pegged in the conference. So, most likely if they do lose, you're looking at either an 8 or a 9 seed, maybe more likely a 9 seed if they fall in this game today. And the goal really is, if you do get this win, then you're into the semifinal round, and hopefully you could keep on winning. But even if you just stop at a win over Louisville, that's probably enough, I would think, to get them off of the 8-9 line. And then maybe you're going to Michigan to play a 2-seed Michigan, who they already played in a game earlier this year. I mean, then it's just a little bit more attainable to win in that second round game and get to the Sweet 16.
All right, let's talk lacrosse, and a big one, obviously, for the men this weekend. A rivalry game going down to Johns Hopkins. We had Drew Carter on a little bit earlier. I asked him about the rivalry. I'll ask you, does this still feel like a big rivalry? It was obviously the biggest in the sport at one time. Does it still move the needle for you?
Yeah, I think it's still the biggest rivalry for Syracuse. I think Johns Hopkins has a whole lot of rivalries, and the Orange have a lot of rivalries as well. But, I mean, even hearing Rick Beardsley earlier this week on the show, he still gets fired up for Johns Hopkins week. So I think if you are a Syracuse alum or a Syracuse player from the heyday, you certainly are more locked in for Johns Hopkins. And even if this wasn't a rivalry game, it's just a really important game for Syracuse. And it's playing a team that's very similar in the rankings to them. They're coming off a come-from-behind big win that kind of saved their season maybe, and a very similar script to Syracuse in the last game when Hopkins took down Virginia. So it certainly feels like still one of the biggest games in the sport, and it's going to get the most eyeballs probably this weekend of any game, because Hopkins and Syracuse are very much still the blue bloods, if you want to call them that, in the sport. So I still think it has a lot of weight as a rivalry game, and I think the players lean into that a little bit. This group of players understands the history of playing for Syracuse lacrosse, so I'm sure they're motivated a little extra this week, knowing it's Hopkins on the other side.
That's Tim Leonard. We saw Syracuse rally from down 4 in the second half against Penn to win that game in overtime. Tim told us earlier in the week that it felt like a season-saving win, as much as something this early in the season can be, season-saving. They've got an opportunity now to, reel off a bunch in a row here. If they're able to take care of Hopkins, seems like a toss-up game. Then you go out west and hopefully take care of business out there. Syracuse can go on a little bit of a run here and, set itself up for success heading into conference play.
Yeah, they're all important right now. You've kind of taken
especially when you lose back-to-back games.
Yeah, you kind of taken away your margin of error there if you want to be a good seed in the NCAA tournament. I think their strength of schedule will carry them if they can even just fight their way through. But you want to be a top seed moving forward.
No doubt. Yeah, set yourself up for the best path possible to Memorial Day weekend and to the national title. How do you want to end the week, Paulie?
Today is National Spray Tan Day, Steve.
Okay.
You as a TV star, you spray tan? Have you ever?
I have gone once in my life.
Did it change your color?
It was for my wedding.
Oh, really? Did you soil your tuxedo with your
No,
skin? Does it come off?
It was a little bit, because the honeymoon was going to be in a really warm climate, and I burn if I don't have a little bit of a...
You are very... pasty for an Italian.
Thank you. Yes, I got my mom's skin, tone. So I went. My wife and I went prior to the wedding. It was like 2 weeks ahead. It was like a week or two ahead of time.
Probably the sunburn.
Probably. I don't know.
It doesn't prevent it.
She talked me into it. I went one time.
All right.
So how about you?
Never spray tanned. I've laid in a tanning bed before. I usually do it once a year in the spring and come in and complain to you about it.
That's right.
I've
You're right.
Burned all of the skin off of my body.
I did it once. I don't think I'll ever do it again. Let's leave it at that. All right, we're out of time. Enjoy the weekend, everybody. For Paulie, I'm Steve. We'll talk to you again on Monday.
Download the WSYR Plus app on your TV to stream News Channel 9 for free. Just go to your smart TV, search WSYR Plus in the App Store, and download to start streaming today.